So in about an hour, I think we're all going to be very happy, and I'm going to be extra happy because it'll be time for lunch. And part of that is because I love food. Okay, I got a couple of laughs there. Some people, okay, good, we got some thumbs up. Some people may not believe me. So I asked my mother to prove that I love food, and she sent me this. So apparently, when I was a kid, before the pandemic, obviously, I could destroy watermelon like nobody's business. And over time, probably my love for food and for cooking has just sort of taken root. I love cooking for family, friends, others. Love experimenting with recipes or things that I've never tried doing. That's experiment number 8 with dumplings. My family does not have a recipe that's been handed down for generations. And then last Christmas, I went for something like this, a rose apple tart. But I love food. I love cooking. And also, I love EDGY, which I think many of the people here in this room also love EDGY. I've heard there are a couple of edgy, curious folks, so that's fine too. But I think it was probably the facets and intersections model, this Venn diagram, that just sort of caught my attention. And of course, with all of the possibilities that something like this offers, so many different things, and especially since I come from the United States where TOGAF is a big thing, the idea of something lighter, simpler, pretty was something that just really drew me to this. And of course, then coming into the community and meeting people like Helgi.
So I was sitting, no, yeah, I was sitting on a red couch in my basement. I had a bowl of popcorn on one side and a Coke Zero on the other side. My basement is set up as a movie theater, so I had about 140-inch screen on the wall. And I was probably one of the few people that were actually happy that the pandemic forced Intersection to go online, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to attend. I had been introduced, I'd bought Milan's book a few months earlier, and I got a little bit enthusiastic about that because I'd been looking for a model that resonated, that I felt took this holistic perspective. My background is from all of these, and I never found anything that, it's always something missing. And in this conference was my first introduction to EDGY. What drew me to EDGY was absolutely like Stewart was talking about, is the simplicity. It's something you can apply to basically any situation, any context, any industry, and any enterprise. And you can really take any discipline and you can work with and assist them in collaboration between those disciplines. But as I actually started to work with EDGY and get to know EDGY more, especially when I started to interact with the people of the community of EDGY, I also realized I wouldn't want to say the dark side of EDGY, but the other side of EDGY, which is actually, if I use my friend Jon Sebastian's quote, EDGY is really simple to understand, but difficult to master. And that is something that I've realized the more and more I started to work with it, the more I started to interact with the people that are working with it, that it is difficult to master. It is a little bit too simple. It's a little bit too elegant, if you can say that. It brings everybody, and anything you can do, anything that helps you do anything, basically helps you do nothing, unless you actually structure it. And that is something that became my passion a little bit, and one of the things that drove the work I did with the enterprise scan. That is, how can we actually simplify it? How can we bring it closer to other people? And that is basically the question. How can we do that? So when Stewart contacted me and said, okay, what if we had a recipe? So anyway, my name is Helgi, as most of you have then hopefully heard of. But I'm titled as the head of community development at its intersection group. I'm not really sure because I think I've basically handed over to Alex. But so I'm doing lots of other things, so maybe I need to change my title now, but we'll see what happens with that. And my colleague here is...
I'm Stewart Uyeda. I'm an enterprise architect in higher education based out of Los Angeles, California.
So Stewart contacted me and basically said, okay, we have the cookbook, but what is about the recipes? And it started with the big cookbook that has been quoted several times. It is a monumental work. If you haven't looked at it, I have to admit, I haven't read it, but who has? Wow, I'm impressed. There are actually people that read the whole thing. It's big, and there's a lot of awesome work in there, and there's some work that I don't really agree with, but that's also really good because it appeals to different people. But one thing about the cookbook, it kind of describes the courses. So here's a course, here's a description of the course. Possibly even the flavor of the course, but it doesn't give you the recipe. So you kind of have to know what you're doing in order to actually replicate that. So the question is, so it's kind of like for me is, imagine I'm standing in the kitchen and I've been handed the task of cooking a fine dinner for my family and friends. I have all the ingredients. I even have pictures of the courses that I'm supposed to cook, and the tools I need to do it. But that's it. I consider myself a decent cook. I'm not great. My kids don't complain. That's something. But I have a very limited variation of what I actually cook. So I'm good at cooking what I do cook, but it's only about 10, 12 courses, and then you just repeat them all the time. So I would stand there in the kitchen and I would just, oh my God, how do I do this? I would look at the ingredients. I would probably pretend to know what I'm doing, but in the end, I would not know what I'm doing. And it would take a lot of time, and it would definitely not look like the pictures. So if I had like, okay, these are the courses you're supposed to prepare, and these are the recipes for how to prepare them. So it would really help us to do that. And this is what Stewart came with me. Okay, is this something that we can do? And the question then be, okay, where do we start? And I asked Stewart about that. Where do you want to start? And he came up with, oh, well, reframing. I think that's an interesting concept within the cookbook. Something that might need to go a little deeper into. And I completely agree, because I think this is a really interesting concept. But what is reframing all about? And this is something that can be a little bit, it's different what people actually see it with. And a lot of people have a different difficulty in actually understanding framing and reframing something. So I wanted to ask my friend Rory Sutherland to help us out a little bit with that. So that's what he says about reframing.
The Eurostar. £6 million spent to reduce the journey time between Paris and London by about 40 minutes. For 0.01% of this money, you could have put Wi-Fi on the trains, which wouldn't have reduced the duration of the journey, but would have improved its enjoyment and its usefulness far more. For maybe 10% of the money, you could have paid all of the world's top male and female supermodels to walk up and down the train, handing out free Chateau Petrus to all the passengers. You'd still have £5 billion in change, and people would ask for the trains to be slowed down. Why were we not given the chance to solve that problem psychologically? I think it's because there's an imbalance, an asymmetry in the way we treat creative, emotionally driven psychological ideas versus the way we treat rational, numerical, spreadsheet driven ideas.
So we come up with solutions. Oh, we have to make it a little bit faster. How do we make it faster? Oh, we change the whole infrastructure. It's a really big project. It takes 5 years. It costs 6 billion euros. And yeah, I mean, we get half an hour faster train, but is the experience really better? What are we competing with? Is train really competing with air travel or the personal car? Or is it something else? Can we make it a better experience? So the question is, how do we actually take that? How do we go from that? Because we come from different perspectives, and our perspectives are very often limited. We are colored by our experience, our background, the people we work with, the industry we work in. And this will it will color how we see solutions. What solutions do we jump on? And this is something we are really fixed in this mindset. So in order to actually go beyond that and find something new, we need to become more holistic. But that is easier said than done. So really framing a problem and then jumping into a different solution, reframing it, requires quite a lot of effort and energy, and something that we really, basically a capability that we generally don't have. So what if we have a recipe to help us reframe, to help us, to guide us from one frame to the other one?
The dreaded white screen or the whiteboard. What would a recipe even look like for something like this? Now, Helgi, I am pretty weird. I did read the entire cookbook. I also read cookbooks just in general for fun. And when I thought about what a recipe might look like, there are going to be little components of that, right? So we're going to need to know the people it's going to serve, break it down into simple steps, maybe the cooking time. And maybe the goal for this notion of reframing then would really be to get conversations started that would then generate wonderful ideas. And if we took those ideas, mixed them up, sprinkled a little bit of magic, what might that look like then? So this is probably our 5th attempt at this, still not official, but it might look like something like this. So breaking down the notion of reframing a design challenge. So you have a design challenge, but how holistic is that view? Some notes. We have some of the ingredients or things that we're going to need and the simple steps. I'll get into the simple steps in a little bit. But we just thought maybe a 1-page, no fuss, sort of Cliff Notes version of what you'd have to do to make this work. In this particular case, the 4 steps are pretty simple. We just want people to start where they're at for the first one, then to explore the problem, then to maybe look at the problem from a different perspective. So there's the reframing part. And then taking all of that information, synthesizing it, and bringing it home. And if that sounds sort of familiar, I'm not going to take credit or appropriate it, but in a way, this is sort of design thinking meets EDGY, right? So in this case, reframing can be used in so many ways, right? Taking this to a more personal level at my place of work, everybody loves the solution, but they never spend enough time thinking about the problem. So I wanted to find a way to sort of incorporate or sneak EDGY in, I guess like sneaking in vegetables, you know, for kids, but applying it to design thinking in this case, because that's just where I sort of grew up from. And so at this point, I thought I was done. Helgi said, but wait, just because you have a recipe doesn't mean you can actually cook, right? So in honor of Belgium, you might want to make waffles. You might end up with something like that, right? So then it became a question of, okay, what if we were to guide people through this process, right? And again, if we take inspiration from the cooking world, you have cooking workshops or cooking classes, right? So it became a question of, well, what about a workshop? And so I took those 4 steps, added a start and a beginning, and then underneath that, this is all in Miro, created sort of a guided process that probably requires somebody to facilitate. But if you're used to this, it's probably pretty easy to use, or I think it's easy to use. And maybe to zoom into one of the areas, like I think I picked architecture. So similar to actually what other people have done, adding prompts or questions that help spur those discussions, but then having the sticky notes so they're ready to go, but having sort of a template that could be used pretty quickly. And again, we're not going to zoom in at, to individual screens, but the spirit of this is probably, we're looking for two paths or 2 goals. At a very high level, we're starting with framing that initial idea, or we call it the initial design challenge. You go through your exploration and the little sections to think through the problem. And the goal towards the end is you want to be able to reframe that or restate it. So that's goal number 1. And goal number 2, in the spirit of this conference, untangling the mess that's in everybody's heads from their different perspectives, their ideas, making sense of that. And you could still use that at the very end as organized ideas that could be led into the next section, right? So they're almost like high-level pre-requirements, things that you might want to explore when you're going to solution in that next diamond if we're thinking design thinking. Before I go any further, because the next couple of slides will really require you to sort of understand this, does this make sense? See nods? Yes, yes, good. Okay, so I brought 2 examples. I didn't want to call them case studies, but I brought 2 of them from, one from my current place and one from my previous institution. But I also have, I guess, a bit of a confession too. So I'm an enterprise architect. I have worked with large ERPs. I love the complexity, but I think the confession is I sometimes like working on simpler things every now and then, right? And when I get invited to meetings and I'm sort of, this isn't an enterprise situation, it's always fun to actually leverage these techniques or even leverage EDGY to solve smaller problems. It shouldn't be, I think, Wolfgang, you had said early on, it shouldn't be created by the few for the benefit of the few, right? So in this case, it could be used for so many other things. So the first example is from my current place of work, which is Loyola Marymount University in Southern California. If you ever fly into Los Angeles, LAX, which is sort of a rough airport, if you're about to land, you just have to look to the right and you'll probably see that in the distance. So it's beautiful right by the beach. And there was a sort of a funny problem that they were facing, or that one of my adjacent teams was facing, which was a challenge with the what they're calling the work intake process. This is probably a common thing at many places. I'm seeing nods. Okay. So there's the help desk. There are no official business relationship managers, but there are directors who might be interfacing across the university. There's a ticketing system. There's email, phone, all sorts of stuff. This is being recorded. I don't want to call it a mess, but sort of a mess. And so they were wondering how could they untangle that. And when I was brought in from a colleague, I figured I would sort of sneak this into the process. So I'll walk you through what sort of happened. They came in. We had a meeting with a group of people. They stated the problem, which is, they need to update the work intake process. And what was interesting then, and I think we've all had this experience. So they sort of talk a little bit about the current process. But we I'm assuming because of this group, you sort of know the edgy colors, but maybe I should call it out more. So we have architecture. So they talked about the process that was broken, some of the steps that were involved, but they had a solution in mind. So they had product already sort of lined up. They had some ideas of how they were going to fix this. And after probably 5 minutes, they were done. They were ready to jump to that next step and start solutioning. And what was funny, again, as an enterprise architect or maybe enterprise designer, I looked at that and I realized it's not a holistic view, right? We're missing, again, us edgy practitioners, we're missing those 4 other areas. So I punished them in a way because since I was there, I figured I would steer the conversation a little bit differently to explore what's happening in those other facets and intersections. The easiest one to pick on was just moving adjacently and asking them about the organization. So what's the scope, as we sort of talked about this too? Is it just the help desk? Is it for VIP level projects? Oh, is it just for one team, another team? So they started thinking about who was involved. The only people in the room were IT folks. So similar to other discussions that have popped up, what about the voices of the users or the people we're going to be interfacing with? That felt like an easy, sneaky way to then go into experience. Well, if we think about these users or the people we're working with, what's their experience with it? The proposed solution they had, we need a single web form that's going to take everything and make our lives easier. How many people love web forms, right? It's probably, I mean, technically it makes sense, right? But from an experience perspective, it's not really good. And what was funny too then was, well, what is the experience of a senior leader of the university versus a student who needs help unlocking a computer? So they started thinking about that. Without prompting, they ended up going into brand without even realizing they were going to go into brand, because they started thinking about, well, who are we as an IT organization? What kind of reputation do we have? And the term white glove service popped up more than once. And so they started thinking about, well, does a web form provide white glove service? And so these little hidden tensions started to appear, again, just from the conversations. And then finally, I did not mention this earlier, but Loyola Marymount University is a Catholic university, and it's founded in the Jesuit and Marymount traditions. And so you would think purpose is really, really important, and it is to the organization. But were the IT teams living their purpose then, right? See a big smile there. So in the matter of, I think, it's probably about an hour of sort of discussing and brainstorming and sort of logging these sort of sticky notes. The next section was sort of reframing or attempting to reframe the initial problem from different perspectives. Actually, Jean-Sebastian and Daniel, it was sort of like one of your slides, where I think the way I sort of teach this or encourage people to think of it is, if you imagine each of the facets from the C-level or some role. So if we're going to try to think of this problem from the product lens, how might a chief product officer think of that problem, right? Or if we're going to think about this as an organizational problem, what might the chief human resources officer or chief people officer think about that problem? And so they thought about it. Again, we jotted some notes. And here's how things turned out at the end. So when we started, we thought we need to update our work intake process. But what it's actually about is how we serve our university and each other. And one of the interesting things about the language we chose there, there's a Jesuit, I don't want to call it a motto, but it's a very simple phrase. It's part of their mission, and it's this idea of serving for and with others. So for others and Helgi. with others, right? And so it's interesting that they were able to sort of reframe and embed the university's mission in this, right? And instead of focusing on something technical, it became very just how we work with each other. A interesting thing then, I didn't bring the extra stuff underneath because that would be just way too much to actually dig through at a conference. But I took a summary, like a 1-paragraph version of it, and it might be something like this. You'll see the colors there, and I'm going to blame also JS for teaching me this. But we, ITS, the organization, want to find a better way to our mission, serve LMU, starting with the process, work intake process, while still providing the white glove brand service or product or service that we pride ourselves on delivering and that experience the university expects and deserves. I could have modeled that. What I'm finding though is sometimes keeping it in plain English but throwing colors on there can also be just as effective. You can actually do both, right? We can take this and model it. You can also take the model and create sort of a plain English statement. And I think that's a wonderful way to test whether or not that model works. And the lead project manager that I was working with shared this one. So this provides a way for us to collaborate with stakeholders and for stakeholders to collaborate with each other. And I think I love the second part of that because I realize I sometimes assume, stakeholders are getting along just great and it's IT that's not communicating with them that well. But sometimes the reality is even the stakeholders need some help bridging those gaps too. So a simple language like EDGY really, really helps for that. Second example is my previous organization, so USC, or the University of Southern California, also in Los Angeles, California. And this one was about 5 years ago, which if you start to think about it was pre-EDGY. So this is a slightly different version of leveraging the recipe. I guess in the middle, or it was the pandemic. I can't remember the exact date. March 11th, I think we were sent home. And then I think at the end of May, I was asked as an enterprise architect to help with the pandemic response to get the university up and running again. And so I was asked to put together a team, and our chief health officer said, we need a way for people to track their symptoms, something like that. And so I'm going to go in the opposite order. So there was that. I was wondering, in retrospect, whether or not somebody else could have come to the same conclusions I came up with. I'd like to think I'm a holistic thinker in general. So even before EDGY, I was sort of thinking about this already. But as the experiment, I grabbed a couple of my old colleagues to go through the worksheet. I sort of facilitated and just let them explore and to see whether or not they would come up with a better statement and a better idea of how we tackled that pandemic response. So working backwards, when we first started, we thought we need to develop a way for people to determine whether they're cleared to be on campus during the pandemic. So I think everybody had to do those surveys when going into the hospital and all that, right? We did this really, really early in the process. After they went through that exercise, this is what they came up with. It's actually about keeping the Trojan family safe. USC are the Trojans, so there's a big thing about the Trojan family, but it's just keeping people safe. And again, if I take that paragraph, something summarized from underneath, we need to develop something, so process and product, for the Trojan family, so brand, to remain and feel safe, mission, when they are on campus, channel, yes, and to allow USC organization to restart experience, teaching, learning, and research during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we did that, cheating, of course, because again, we had more experience and we were doing this in retrospect. We did that in a little over an hour in just exploring those different facets and intersections. And the reason it was sort of cool to see what they came up with was our work was featured, or maybe not our work, but the broader pandemic response was featured in both our local Los Angeles Times and then also for the UK folks here in The Guardian. So it was really cool to see pictures of people. And again, if you sort of just look at the headlines, you know, you could sort of interpret the process of returning to campus, also the safety part. So a lot of that message that we were trying to sort of think through and we sort of crafted as that reframe statement, I think are all there. And this is how that workshop sort of worked. So I'll skip through this first part. So we definitely had the easy frame and reframe. But just like with recipes, you should follow them, but you don't have to follow them, right? You can sort of riff on them, and sometimes you might make it a different way, or you're just going to feel a little different. What I found interesting about watching them work through this was there was a bit of magic that happened when they were trying to pretend to be those C-level executives and sort of going through the worksheet. And there was sort of this wonderful sort of loop that popped up. And we started scribbling, and this is probably a cleaner version of what we started to observe. And Milan, this was what I was talking to you about. We started to realize that each of our roles sort of naturally covered a portion of the model. So our lead developer was really thinking from an architecture and product perspective. Our analyst was thinking from experience and product. Our wonderful designer was thinking the same thing, but also thinking through brand. We definitely had the medical health teams that were thinking also with their own set of processes and tools. And of course, then our leadership team and communications team, who are probably, you know, living over in the typical green and orange areas. And we realized that because we were working already in a holistic manner and we were co-creating, even if we took away that model, it sort of showed we had good coverage all around. And one of the managers on the team said this about this process, which I think could be translated to just EDGY in general. This helps people understand where they fit in, how they're connected, and ultimately helps build empathy and trust across teams. And Lorena, your formula made me smile because I saw the empathy and trust part, right? And when we think back to sort of what made it work, it was probably that empathy and trust. Calvin also helped me realize another thing that might be related to both cooking and the theme of this conference. So if you watch cooking demonstrations, you'll usually see the chef at a big table and ingredients are already pre-measured, right? So there's a cooking term, mise en place, but everything in its place. And if you don't follow that mindset, you sort of end up with something like this, right? Or like when I was a kid, you know, you'd read step 1 and you'd go find the ingredients and you'd start to cook. By the time you get to step 4, you're trying to measure something, but then your food's burning. And then by the time you get to step 6, you're going to the fridge and you realize, oh, I forgot an ingredient. And then you really have no meal at the end. So Copilot, which was my friend in creating this, would like you to know this piece of art, if we would call it art, is entitled Mise en Place versus Mayhem from 2025, a study in culinary contrast. But I'm grateful that AI had this because otherwise, if I did this at home to try to take a picture, my wife would have killed me. So I guess thinking about all of this and trying to think through food, edgy, um, just all of this stuff, I think I realize that food is my love language. Probably edgy too. My wife would also say she would hate that because I should probably tell her that I love her more often. But in a way, for those of us who love food, we sort of show our love by learning to make their favorite dish, pozole, or making a large batch, saving half of it for another day, and then not feeling guilty about cleaning up the initial batch. We're always saying take some home if we're with family and friends and all that. And when I think back to, I think some of my favorite memories of travel, um, cinnamon rolls in Reykjavik. So I'll send you this place since you're going to go there soon. Or fish and chips in Edinburgh. Those were obscenely like giant fish and chips. Or my favorite Hakata ramen in Los Angeles. Or even working with a notion of like a work family. So I don't know why, but the group I work with, they're like amazing cooks and they have bake-offs. But and that was 1, 2, and 3, or first, second, and third place. Or Helgi at home, cooking for family, not quite with the watermelon in your face. But it made me sort of think of this quote, which is, cooking is about love. It's about family, about memories, and about our connection to each other. And I think all of that wrapped up probably led me to just this little summary, which is, oops, oh, boo, sorry, the clicker. Food brings us together, and so does EDGY. Okay. But if, oh. And if you think about it, and we are going to eat soon, right? Food is one of those that we all have to eat, right? We all cook. Leveraging the notion of cooking recipes is something that I think is hopefully universal across humans, right? It's a shared experience. And I think EDGY, or recipes or workshops, also have the potential of being a shared experience, right? With a good facilitator, that shared experience, I think, can lead to shared understanding. But it really is, these are things that bring us together. Here you go.
I want to take it a little bit different direction from that, and I think he stole a little bit of what I was going to say. But anyway, the thing is, when we work in an enterprise, we don't have the same level of intimacy as a family, but we still have this need to collaborate. We still have this need to come together. And I would say there's a lot of similarities in a way that you need this humility, you need this empathy, you need this trust. The same things you have in a family, you need in the organization, even if you maybe can't create the same level of intimacy as in a family. You still need those things to come together, and bringing that into some way. So how can we better facilitate that dialogue? That is something that we need to be able to do better, because as it does give us the tool to get there, but actually applying it is can be a little bit difficult. It can be intimidating to a lot of people. And when we started this journey, is very interesting because I can't take any credit actually for the work that you've been seeing here. That is 99% Stewart. My role has been more of a nudging and asking probing questions and stuff like that, being annoying and irritating, and challenging him in various ways. And that has been a really interesting journey to see where we started with this. Okay, what is a recipe? And then actually, okay, where are we coming to actually having a recipe that I would not say that complete amateurs can follow. The goal is not to target people that have never boiled water or turned on an oven, but people that are familiar with working in a kitchen, that are familiar with facilitating something or doing architecture work or design work, that they can actually, they don't have to go through a master class. That they can actually take this without having to unlearn 50 other things that they have accumulated over time, and they don't have to take 1 week to try to learn it. They can simply step in, so that you don't have to be a master chef to be able to use Etsy and use these terms and use these tools. You can actually be an average cook, an amateur. It's good enough. And you don't have to, even if you have a recipe, you don't have to follow it. Just like Stewart said, a recipe helps you get started. Follow that recipe if it helps you, but after that, if you've done that 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you will probably start, no, I don't like this much cinnamon in there. I'm going to use a little less. Or what my mother is always doing with pretty much everything. If it's supposed to be 1 pound of sugar, yeah, you probably only need half. And then maybe add some other honey or something like that instead. And so you can start playing around with the dishes and making them yours, adapting them to the context, adapting them to the audience, but the recipe helps you get started. So that's what the recipe is. It's not a guide, you have to do it like this. It is a suggestion, hey, you have a difficulty in getting started with that, try doing it that way in the beginning. So just by sprinkling a little bit of extra stuff on there, we can actually go a lot further than we otherwise would. So this is one way of looking at how can we take what we have right now. And this is a thing that I was really glad that Stewart actually reached out. Hey, can you help me with this? We can take the stuff that's already exists. I think it was Wolfgang, or I don't remember, it was Wolfgang or Milan that said that yesterday. What we want to do with the sandbox is that we want to get more tools in there. We want to get more ideas in there. We want to get more recipes in there that are not only a picture of the dishes, but actually a step-by-step, how do we actually go about it? We can start with a picture of the dishes because that will take us quite far just in the beginning. And then someone else can take it up and create the recipe, just like Stewart did, that Eero actually created the picture of the dish, but then Stewart is creating the recipe. Or you can come up with a completely different dish. So the question I want to pose to you guys as a final note in this, where can we go from here? How can we collaborate on actually creating the next cookbook with actual recipes that take us all the way and help people start using Etsy, and we can collaborate on actually helping people create better enterprises?